Hi guys, let me know you're here, leave a message. Brad, good to see you, man. How's everything going there? I'm just going to, I'm doing a bit of a mock-up. I still haven't got everything ready to, I still haven't moved into the new place, so everything's in storage. So I'm shooting this from the dojo, which is where I'll probably be shooting in future. Frederick from Sweden, good to see you, man. So you recovered well, Brad? Everything back to 100%? Marco, good to see you. So we'll get going and we'll chat, but I was just inquiring, my buddy Brad, he and I go back to teenage years, but he was a bit crook. He got the COVID, and I'm just asking him how he went. So today, here we are at the dojo. My apologies for missing the last couple of weeks. We still have ongoing problems with the new place, so everything's in storage. All my gis, I'm down to one gi. 100%, that's good news, Brad. Next, you'll have to come and visit us in Australia on a US passport. Still not settled 100%, but we're getting there. The situation right now is that things look like they'll be resolved tomorrow. So that's not a bad thing. I'll keep you informed. Today, we're looking at Dipankar. Good to see you. Namaste. So today I want to look at Uchi Uke. We know Uchi Uke. It's the standard Kihon technique, Uchi Uke. First of all, we'll look at the Uchi Uke as it's done in Kihon. And then we'll go a little bit deeper and analyze what makes it what I think is the gem of the Kihon techniques. Even though in tournament fighting, you rarely see it. I was talking to Sensei Pete Collis on Monday night. For those Aussies who are here, they'll know Pete Collis. He's one of Australia's great all-time tournament champions. I fought him twice in the final of the Australians. 1984, he beat me with Ippon. In 1986, I got my revenge. But to this day, we still train together and we're very close. And he was saying on Monday night how in the third world tournament, when he was fighting in the final 16 against Tahara to get into the final 8, Pete's that good. He said out of the blue, an Uchi Uke came out. Just without thinking, Uchi Uke came out and it worked perfectly and it caught Tahara by surprise. But we don't see it very often in tournaments, simply because it's all punching. But the main reason I think we don't see it in tournaments is because grabs aren't allowed. And if you combine Uchi Uke with grabbing, it becomes what I consider to be one of the most valuable techniques. It's also really good with strikes to the jaw, neck, and head, which are also not allowed in tournaments. So that's why if it's not in the rules of the tournament, fighters are going to ignore it when they're preparing for tournaments. Okay, so that's a very important point. Kenneth, good to see you. It's all turned around. Now Melbourne's free. We've just come off a lockdown last week and we're meant to be wearing masks in public still, so things have reversed. But anyway, so first of all, I'd like to pay homage to Kihon or Hanshi Steve Arneil. As you may have heard, Steve Arneil passed away on Friday, July 2nd, and he left a real void in Kyokushin, especially in Kyokushin in England. His story is a very fascinating one. He was very close to Sosai. He was training with him in the 60s. In Japan, he was one of the first foreigners to be training with Sosai. And he's originally from Zimbabwe, from northern Rhodesia, which was called then Zimbabwe now. And at the end of his training, he was training at the old Oyama dojo with Bob Bolton. And Bob Bolton was very, very instrumental in setting up Kyokushin in Australia, even though he was an Englishman. But he convinced Steve Arneil, rather than to return to Zimbabwe after training, he convinced him to move to UK, and Kyokushin history was changed. And there's some really interesting things. What I find fascinating about Steve Arneil is he was what I think was probably the first great innovative instructor in Kyokushin. Well, that's not fair, because Sosai, of course, his innovations ended up creating Kyokushin. But in terms of Kyokushin spreading around the world, Steve Arneil took back what he learned in Japan and became a great innovator. And from the very early days was producing the most outstanding champions. Us Daniel, Paddy, Us George. George is one of my newest Patreon family members. So just a quick shout out to all my Patreon family. Thank you for your ongoing Patreon support. There is a newsletter coming out in the next couple of days with some fascinating information. So keep an eye out for that. But welcome, George. And Mac, good to see you. Bill from US, thanks for joining us. So he went back to England from Japan rather than going to Zimbabwe, and he created the BKK, the British Kyokushin Karate Federation. But, you know, one thing that a lot of people didn't realize was that Steve Arneil was actually the first coach in non-contact karate. So we know that karate goes into the Olympics this year in Tokyo, which the Olympics start in a couple of weeks. And karate is one of the guest sports. And it's the non-contact karate, the Japan Karate Federation style of karate. Now, Steve Arneil was the first coach outside of Japan to train a national team that beat the Japanese in the World Championship. And that was the British team. I think it was about 1970. And that team consisted of 4 fighters, 3 of whom were Kyokushin. And that alone, I think, probably drove the Japanese insane, because to this day, many traditional Japanese karate organizations don't really see Kyokushin as karate, particularly the ones that are founded in Okinawa. But Steve Arneil was the first coach to train a team in non-contact karate and beat the Japanese at their own game. And that alone is an outstanding achievement. He was then invited into the World Karate Federation, World Karate Organization, but he made a decision. He chose to focus on the full contact. And then, as you know, he started to be very instrumental in the development of some of Kyokushin's greatest all-time fighters, including Brian Fitkin and Howard Collins, who are both in Sweden, including the more modern generation of fighters such as Nick DaCosta, Michael Thompson, Glenn Sharp, who was just a mind-blowing fighter. And one fighter in particular that I had the honor of meeting was Dave Pickthall. Dave Pickthall was multiple times clicker champion of UK, multiple times kata champion of UK, multiple times European clicker champion, and also a highly successful full contact fighter as well. And Dave, in 1988, Dave and his buddy Ian Thorpe, who was also multiple times UK kata champion and clicker champion, they were traveling the world, and on their travels they came and visited us in Australia, stayed at the dojo for 2 or 3 weeks, I think, maybe even longer, or they came back, because after they came, they went off to New Zealand, and then Matsui came out and stayed with us for a month. And during that time, Dave and Ian Thorpe and Dave Pickthall came back and stayed in Brisbane for another month to train with Matsui. Now, Dave, has always been a very, very nice man, other than being an incredible karate man. I still can't get over the fact that he'd live on McDonald's, and before he'd eat the burger, he'd take the lettuce and tomato off. But anyway, no one could deny his karate. Now, Dave, I have no doubt, like thousands of UK Kyokushin fighters, he would feel this loss very strongly, perhaps even stronger than many others, because for the last 4 to 5 decades, he grew up with the influence of Kihon Steve or Hanshi Steve Arneil. And now the mantle of responsibility for the IFK is on Dave's shoulders. I couldn't think of a better person. So my condolences, first of all, to the Arniel family and to all the members of the IFK. Not just the IFK, but also members around the world who aren't members of that organization, but in Kyokushin in general, because Steve Arneil was genuinely one of the great pioneers of the Kyokushin world. His fighters are outstanding. His organization was outstanding, and his history, including being the first one to fight to do the 100-man kumite, his history is beyond reproach. So congratulations to Dave, but I understand your mourning, and I offer you my best wishes for the future of Kyokushin in the UK. And I'm sure you'll have incredible support around the world. What styles are representing Australia? I don't even know if there's any Australians in the Olympics, Marco. Mainly because to qualify, it's a little bit like boxing. Every country doesn't get to send its fighters. You have to qualify by winning regional championships. And then from those regions, then you can compete. So I have a feeling, I wouldn't be surprised if there's no more than about 32 fighters in the entire competition from karate around the world in the Olympics. They can't have 250 fighters. They can't fight off and on, go on and on and on until there's one fighter. So they've done all the preliminary competitions, and those fighters who excelled in their regionals will go to the Olympics. I don't even know if there's a single Australian fighter. Perhaps there is. And what's happened here? But good luck. I hope the karate does well in the Olympics. I don't even know if kata is in the Olympics. I don't know the format, whether it's kumite plus kata or just kumite or just kata, but whatever it is, it's a big achievement for karate to finally make it into the Olympics. Was Harry, Ankur, namaste. Usmak, yes. Paddy, Harry. Yeah, no cuts or bruises today. Training's after this, not before. Raj Kumar from Nepal. Namaste to you too. Semi-contact and Kyokushin won't get, no. There's no semi-contact. And having said that, look, I have tremendous respect for what we call non-contact karate. If you've ever seen some of those non-contact fights, there's very little non-contact. Those guys whack each other hard, and there's no doubt about it. The difference is it stops. It's point karate, so they stop the fight, and the referee determines the outcome, not the fighters. So it has that side to it, but I can tell you now, those guys are lightning fast, and you want to be really on point to beat them at their own game, especially. I understand a few Kyokushin, top-level Japanese Kyokushin fighters competed in the non-contact All Japan championships, and they all got smashed very quickly, very easily. So, God bless Steve Arneil. May he rest in peace. Patreon, thank you for those Patreon members. Your support makes a genuine difference, and thank you very much. Us, Rob, good to see you. Now, don't forget, if you're already a member of the website, the what is it, YouTube, that's it. If you're not a member, hit the join button, become a member, leave a message, leave a thumbs up. Just help me to grow the channel, because I'm trying to get my message of Kyokushin to as many people as I can. And every little bit helps. So spread the word. That's the best way to do it. All right, today's theme, Uchi Uke. Okay, and we understand Uchi Uke as it is. Get my leg, my blood flowing. That's a bit better. My legs are starting to wake up after sitting there. So Uchi Uke, we understand. We do it from Sanshin, from this position. Uchi Uke means inside block. Again, you know I don't like the word block, but it's the word that is commonly translated. Uchi Uke literally means an inside receiving motion. Okay, so in basics, we start here. The back hand is turned. It's not here like this. It's never like this. The back hand is turned, so you get the torque through the spine. The hand turns and comes to the opposite armpit. So the blocking hand, watch this hand. As you do it, it literally does that. One. See this hand? One, and then the elbows are touching. Two. Again, 1, 2. 1, 2. I've got my glasses on. One, elbows have to touch. 2. 1, 2. Like in all techniques, upper block, down, elbows touch. Upper block, down. It's the elbows that touch. It's the elbows touching that creates the block working. Okay, soto uke is not so much because it comes from the outside, but there's still a connection between the movement of the elbows. We don't go 1, 2 like this. We connect the movement. So it's like you have your elbows tied together. 1, 2. Uchi Uke is the same. Inside, elbows touch, out. Inside, elbows touch. Gedan barai, same. So look, gedan barai, trikya, upper block. Uchi Uke, trikya, gedan barai. Jodan uke, Uchi Uke. So they all start from the fundamental principle of the elbows touching together. Uchi Uke, gedan barai, elbows touch together. A lot of people just do this, go through the motions. 1, touch the elbows together. It's only when the elbows touch together that you're actually practicing the correct fundamental drill. Now remember what Kihon means. Kihon is not just the 30 basic techniques. Kihon means anything that you're doing to improve your technique that you use against a non-compliant opponent. So whether it's tournament competition or whether it's real life, all the other training you do in the dojo, even to a point, kumite is a form of Kihon, because you're drilling the principle behind the technique. So when you do kumite, it's not just a battle of who can win. It's a battle of your own mind to improve your own technique. Okay, so this Kihon is not just the 30 basics, it's everything else that's involved. Now, you may remember where I spoke about the 5 ranges and how I had done a count of all the techniques that Solsai taught in his 3 main books. Now, you remember that range 1, kicking range, range 2, punch, range 3 is the headbutt elbow range, range 4 is the stand-up grapple range, and range 5 is the ground range. Now, Solsai's books, and remember that basically tournaments are just range 1 and 2, the kicking and punching. And in the techniques that Solsai taught, only 28%, so less than a third of the techniques that he taught are usable and allowed in tournaments. The rest of what he taught, 72% of what he taught, well over 2/3, are not allowed in tournaments. And that means, particularly in range 4, the stand-up grapple, more than 50% of the techniques that Solsai taught in his books, the techniques that he demonstrated in his books, 57% were in the stand-up grapple range. And that's significant. Stand-up grapple means grabbing. Okay? It means you're grabbing, you're collar tying, underhooking, grabbing arms, wrists, grabbing geese. That's the range 4. And more than 50%, nearly 60%, 57% of the techniques that Solsai taught were in that range. Have we thought about this? What are we doing about it in our own dojos? Do we ignore it because we focus just on tournament fighting? That's 100% okay if that's what you want to do. Just remember that after tournaments last 10 to 12 to 15 years if you're lucky, then you've got another 50 years of training. So what are you going to do? And that's where you need to be conscious of the message of what Solsai taught and what Solsai described as Shin Soseiki, or the New Genesis, which I think was because he left us before he finally explained it. But I think ultimately the New Genesis was about recognizing that the early tournament fighters are now becoming older, and now it was time to introduce a much broader range of techniques. Now, Uchi Uke in itself is very hard to apply in karate against a non-compliant opponent who's working in and out of all the ranges. But when you combine Uchi Uke with the 2-hand motions, then all of a sudden it becomes, that's when I believe it becomes the gem in the crown of Kyokushin Kihon techniques. You raised this a year ago, has been amazing. I'm so glad to hear that, Paddy. Good on you. I mean, it's all there for everyone, but we just need to think about it and take the time. So looking at Uchi Uke, and I'm so sorry I don't have an Uke, a partner to train with. Next week, I hope I will have, and I'll be able to demonstrate some of these. But what I want you to look at, and for example, one way to look at it is in Seiyenshin, the kata Seiyenshin. And that's why I used a photo of Hanshi Daigo Oishi doing Seiyenshin. Because Seiyenshin is a really beautiful kata that introduces this concept of Uchi Uke in its practical form really, really well. It's in other katas too, but it's very obvious in Seiyenshin. And that's this movement. Remember, Seiyenshin has various openings. One here, one here, one here. So you could turn in 1, 2, 1, 2, or even, I think in some groups they describe it as the old man stroking his beard like this. They're all the same. I don't know why they would do this when this is just as good. They're all the same. Don't get me started on all the differences in kata. But anyway, we come from here, down, up. This is one of the few places in kata where the thumbs are not integrated into the hand position. I'm just trying to show you where you can see. We don't come from here, down, and then up here with our thumbs in. And that's significant. Why? Because if you imagine that someone has your throat and they're trying to choke you, not that that happens very often, but it sure enough happens. You bring your thumbs to the outside because you're grabbing the wrists, and then you squeeze the wrists and separate them off your body. So come up, squeeze, and out. Now this is where you'll see the Uchi Uke. There's Uchi Uke. Look, in the kata, we go 1, 2, like that. And this is the kata motion, which shows you Uchi Uke. There's the Uchi Uke. There's the grab. There's the strike. Which could mean, I always believe, spear hand doesn't represent a strike to the body. If you want to do spear hand to your head, fine. The only time I've done anything like a spear hand is when I've spear handed into the throat to grab the carotid, to grab the sternocleidomastoid, this muscle here. So I did the spear hand, but I deliberately missed. If you could imagine, that's the neck. I didn't do the spear hand into the neck. I did the spear hand next to the neck and then grabbed the neck. So my interpretation of spear hand is always, if the hand is open, it represents an opportunity to grab. So in Seiyenshin, what we have is we come down, there's the block. Look, there's Uchi Uke. But there's the block, and it goes continually. It doesn't stop. It goes into the grab. 1, 2, look, block. Notice the hands are touching. Block, grab, and pulls in. And we use that as a strike. But like I said, where there's this grab. And I'll demonstrate to you that when I have an opponent. But you can spend an entire session on that one move, and you will walk away from that session going, I've just had my eyes open. That one movement alone, 1, 2, 1, 2, is one of the golden gems of karate. And you can apply it against all kinds of fighters. You get the hands moving correctly, and someone throws that technique, whether it's a cross, a hook, whatever, the hands come up, and that movement, Uchi Uke, in itself is not sufficient. That movement there. And then this hand, which is a strike in the kata, so it very well may represent a good strike, especially if this movement, if you pull them down, and now you have their head here, you pull them down, and that hand can go into the throat. I'm not the sort of person who wants to drive my fingers into someone's throat. There's a lot of karate techniques I wouldn't use because I'm not prepared to deal with the karma of the outcome. I'm not, well, not anymore, put it that way, okay? So this move, 1, there's the block, there's Uchi Uke, there's the grip, there's the pull, and this strike now becomes another pull. So this is what is commonly called an arm drag. And the arm drag comes here, Uchi Uke. We literally practice it in the dojo where our partner puts an arm on our shoulder and we block it with Uchi Uke. But the Uchi Uke itself is no good. If it was a strike to my head, that movement wouldn't work. It's just not quick enough. If they shot a really fast punch at me, I would be unconscious before my hand was able to pick it up. But if they grabbed, and remember, all fights either start with a strike or a grab, okay? So the techniques you use, while they may be similar, the movement is very different. If you're in a real fight with a striker, you better not hang around and try to do all this sort of stuff. You're either going to move in, close the range, or keep away with your footwork. But if they're grabbing, whether you like it or not, you're now at range 4. You need to be able to deal with those grabs. And so when someone grabs you, now the technique is very different. You knock the arm, you roll over, just like in Seiyenshin. Rock, knock, roll. See that? Knock, roll. Block, you knock the arm off and roll the hand over. Knock it off, roll the hand over. So that movement, when they grab the shoulder, comes up and turns. And look, that hand grabs the wrist. 1, 2. This hand now, 1, 2. Okay, I'll do it on this side because, well, we do it on both sides in the kata anyway. So 1, 2, 1, 2. Now this hand has dealt with the grab. We take the hand off, we knock it off, and the best way, a stitch in time saves 9, so the best way to deal with a grab is deal with it before they grab. The difference between a grab and a punch is a punch moves much quicker than a grab. They can't move their hand to you for a grab anywhere near as fast as they can for a punch, simply because that speed won't allow them to control the grab. So the hands come out for the grabs a lot slower. You still need to be able to deal with that, even though it's slower. So the grab comes, Uchi Uke, and knock. Remember when we're doing Sanshin now, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. See that hand? 1, 2. That grabs. It comes over, maintains contact, and pulls. See that? The second hand, which comes under in the kata as a spear hand, actually reaches up under the armpit and grabs the arm. So this hand knocks the arm, the gripping arm off, and grabs the wrist. And it slides down nicely. When God made man, he made it for wrist grabs, because the two bones come down and the wrist is much wider. You see the wrist goes wider there. So you slide your hand down with your fingers in a C grip and they'll hook on. This is why Solsai said it was so adamant to understand the reason you use the little finger, the importance of the little finger in everything you do, including the fist. So the arm slides down and hooks on. So the grab comes 1, 2, and you hook on. That's that movement out of the kata. 1, 2. See that? Then this hand striking becomes the grab underneath the armpit. Then you pull and it becomes an arm drag. And that arm drag, then, if you can imagine, it's his right arm that I'm dragging. I drag it to this side and he's exposed his back completely. You can choke, you can grab, you can throw, you can bite. You can do anything you need to do to deal with that situation. But this is why I think that movement out of Sanshin, Seiyenshin, and that block in Kihon are so vitally important. And it's really worth researching. So I did, just as I did a count for the 5 ranges, and the 5 ranges is where I counted all the techniques presented by Solsai in his 3 main books, and 57% of what he introduced, 57% are in one range. That is the stand-up grapple range where you're grabbing and throwing. None of those techniques are allowed in tournaments. I found that very interesting. But in the same way that I had far too much time in my hand on that day, on that day, so I had all the time to go through the books. On another day, I also had far too much time, and what I did is I counted all the techniques in all the kata. And the most common technique, what do you think it was? Give me some input. Let me know what you think the most common technique in all the kata is. No surprises, but it's very interesting. No takers. Yeah, getting there. I know that you wrote Uchi Uke, but you're your computer's changed it to urchin use. The most common technique, you're all onto stuff. You're right. The most common technique is chudansuki, middle punch. But yeah, the auto spell sorted that one for you. In the spirit of today, close. The second most common technique was Uchi Uke. And until I had actually taken the time to count all the techniques in all the kata, I would never have thought that the most common technique, the second most common technique, and particularly the most common defensive technique is Uchi Uke. So the most common technique, chudansuki. The second most common technique in all the kata, Uchi Uke. And that made me think, and this is why I got this bee in my bonnet about trying to understand Uchi Uke and its relationship to kata, because you know those guys who put the kata together knew a lot more about karate than us. And when they talk about Uchi Uke, so you got to also remember that, where's Ken? Good to see you, man. Sorry to hear about that tragedy in Florida. Was it Fort Lauderdale where that apartment building collapsed? That's very sad. So the second most common technique in all kata, Uchi Uke, made me think. And remember, the guys that put those kata together, we have to realize that grappling and kata and karate were not separate in the old days. I think most of the time these high-level karate guys had 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th dans in judo as well. They were highly trained. They didn't just do karate because it was a nice thing to do. They were seriously looking for the solutions of how to fight, which meant they very much studied every art. And so they were very highly trained in judo. Well, they're not going to abandon the concepts of judo in the creation of the kata. Okay, so they would actually look for, quite naturally, they would look for connections and similarities between the arts that they studied. And this is why things like Uchi Uke, isolated doesn't do anything. It's just a block. You add that, and now it becomes a block and a grab. That movement now becomes a block and a grab and a pull. Now, you could argue, well, that depends on which technique they throw. Yeah, look, that's out of your control. If you're confronted by someone, you don't know what they're going to do, so your fundamental preparation needs to be able to deal with whatever they throw. But if it's a punch, you're either going to end up on the inside or the outside. So if they throw a left jab, boom, you block it, grab, and go on the inside. Us, Aiden, good to see you, man. Thanks for coming along. Hope everything's well. But if they throw a hard right cross, you're going to have to move your head, and if you're going to use that same technique, now you're on the outside. Okay, so if they throw the left jab and your objective is to stay in the punch range, kick range, then it's head movement and body movement and you counter. But if they throw the left jab or grab and you want to transition to the inside, then it's head movement, lock that down and grab. You have to grab to close into the gap. So against a left jab, the Seiyenshin movement, one, we come over, grab, pull the arm into a 2-on-1 arm drag. But if it's a right cross, now you're it's a little bit different. Same hand blocks, but now when you come up and grab, you're on the outside now. So that arm drag takes you to what's called a 2-on-1 control. So the fundamental movement works very soundly, whether it's the right hand or the left hand. So the Uchi Uke, the beautiful gem of the Uchi Uke is that when you combine it with the grab, by itself, Uchi Uke is, I would say, virtually impossible, or it would take a lot of practice to make that work realistically and practically against a non-compliant, strong opponent. But when you add the second arm, it becomes very useful and very versatile. The block continues in to the second arm, and that second arm now takes control. You could even block, there's the block, There's the Uchi Uke. There's the strike. So remember, a lot of these strikes wouldn't necessarily work. Block, grab, punch to the belly is not going to work. Against a strong guy, it's going to be it's a low percentage technique. But block, grab, strike in the head, grab their head, hit with an elbow, continue on like this, or even as the left jab comes, you block, you cover, you grab, you strike, you then knock this hand down again and you punch, or you knock this hand down, a strike, just like in many of the kata. We have this movement here where we're actually doing that, here like this, knock down, or uke. Well, that movement, you have the hand not like perfectly straight, but like that. That's exactly the technique I used once against a very, very not nice person. And I used that technique and grabbed the side of his neck and then hit with an elbow. But the point is that Osai Uke, look, 1, 2, strike. Then the hand that I'm holding, they're trying to pull it out. You knock it down again and you come over with palm heel, punch, or grab. Does that make sense? Next week, I'll hopefully have a training partner to demonstrate some of this for you. And with the left, you end up on the inside, you do the drag, you pull them through, and then you have them behind. You either start to work on pulling them down, start to work on chokes, or you start to work positioning to throw them to the ground. And if you throw them correctly, you should never end up in a compromised position. That's the other thing you have to recognize, the difference between karate and judo. Because the objective of judo is to throw them to the ground, judo has primarily become a sport, and to win the sport, to win the gold medal, you train to win the gold medal. It means the throw is what a good ippon throw, unbelievably, breathtakingly beautiful, but it doesn't worry them if after the throw they just roll through and end up underneath or end up flat on their back. It doesn't matter. But in karate, it does. So when you throw someone in karate, there isn't a single karate throw that you will ever find in any of Sosai's books where you end up on the bottom. Always, your karate throw should end up with you in a standing position or a control position on top. That's the philosophy of karate as opposed to judo, because we're not a sport. We're a fighting art, and so our objective always has to be remain in an uncompromised position of control. So when you block the left, control, bang, drag through, come behind, you're in control behind them. When they throw the right, look, they throw the left, block, grab, pull. Okay, when they throw the right, exactly the same movement, block, grab, pull. Now I pull here, but now instead of being on the inside of their arm, I'm on the outside of the arm. So it becomes a different technique. But because the initial movement is the same, you have the ability to deal with that initial explosive rush of whether it's a left punch or a right punch or anything like that. If they go for the grab, once again, they either grab across or they grab straight or they grab here or they grab your hair. It doesn't matter. The movement is the same thing. Uchi Uke, break that grip by changing direction. You can't keep your body square and do it. Just as we do it in basics, we turn our body there like this. Well, it's the same thing. When I do the Uchi Uke, I don't just keep my body square and try to use my hand. I use my entire body to knock the block off. Now, that's just, I've paused there for a second because that made me think of connection. Now remember, when I say use your whole body, I had some insights because I've been moving house and I'm packing up boxes. And I realized that some boxes were quite light, so I didn't sticky tape them as much as I should have. So you know in your own mind, if you close a box and put one piece of sticky tape across it, how easy is it to open? It's very easy. You just go, boom, and it opens. You put 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, the more sticky tape you put over it, the harder it gets to open. To the point where if you use that thick tape and you close the box and you put one a long ways and then one across and one across and one across, now it's really stuck. And you're not going to pull that apart at all. What you'll need to do is get a knife and trim it. And I realized this as I was unpacking. The more sticky tape you have, the more difficult it is to open the box. Well, sticky tape is the perfect metaphor for connection. The more of my body I have connected to him, the more control I have of his body. And you know that to be so because if I hold his wrist with my hand, it's very easy. There's not a person watching here who couldn't rip their hand out of a one-hand grip. But if I have your wrist, if I have your tricep, if I have my entire body from here all the way over so that my entire body, including my knee and my hip, is touching your thigh and your hip and your body, the more sticky tape I get on you, the less chance you've got of getting out of it. That's a 100% certainty. And we practice this in the dojo. We go, just grab, get out of it. Grab, get out of it. It's a little bit harder. Grab, get out, bring it in. It's even harder. Grab, get out, maximize the sticky tape so more and more of my body is touching more and more of your partners. There does get to a point where they're just not getting out anymore. It's that simple. So you have to always look for that sticky tape. So when they throw the right, bang, 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 I'm grabbing and I'm looking for that sticky tape. Once I have that sticky tape, they will move wherever I want them to move. And this all comes off this Uchi Uke. The reason it's the second most common technique in all kata is a very good one. When you combine it with that second movement, and I use the illustration out of Seiyenshin simply because that's the only one I've been thinking about lately. I'm sure if I went through it, find 50 other demonstrations as well, illustrations through the kata. But you use that, it's the second hand grabbing that makes the technique versatile. Without that second arm getting involved, it's quite limited. Okay, and then you combine that 1, 2, 3, you combine that motion with body motion to increase the amount of sticky tape, then you really have optimized the value of this Uchi Uke technique. Okay? It's really good when you practice Uchi Uke Gedanbarai. Let me just stand up. Oh, my feet are gone a bit leg sleep again. Sitting in Seiza. Uchi Uke Gedanbarai. You have to, this is really worthwhile practicing in terms of thinking elbow connection. 1, never like this. Yeah, all this sort of thing. Watch my elbows. Yeah. Did I bring them together? No. If I don't bring them together, there's a big gaping hole here that you haven't closed. But as soon as you bring them together, everything changes. Look, my head's covered, my body's covered, my groin's covered, everything's covered. This is a fundamental key to the peekaboo boxing style too. If you watch Floyd Mayweather, when he does the peekaboo, he's literally like this. And he can't do this and make it successful if he doesn't have that Enke Gyakutsuki, Shitomoashi movement. The shoulder and head, the shoulder protects the neck and head, and that elbow, boom, crack, boom, crack. So he's using the same principle in the peekaboo style of boxing. Elbows must come together, and you can spend time practicing that. Get in front of a mirror, make sure that it's touching. There. Well, that Uchi Uke Gedanbarai obviously is intimately connected now to the Uchi Uke block. So it's really, really important. And the main reason why you don't see it in tournaments is because of the grabbing rule. Was almost ready to send you a video of me doing Kaka whole white crane. Oh, nice, very interesting. What's Mike? Good to see you, man. You've missed all the secret stuff. Sorry, can't go back. Permission to send the sticky tape metaphor to some BJJ instructor friends of mine. Yeah, by all means. I mean, I'm sure they fully get it, and I wouldn't be surprised if they have an even better metaphor, Brad. So if they do, pass that back to me, because I'm always looking for good metaphors. But anyway, so the reason we don't see it in tournaments primarily is, one, no headshots, two, primarily no grabbing. If you had grabbing, you would see Uchi Uke. You'd see 1,000% increase in the use of Uchi Uke in tournaments with the grabbing, because as they grab, this motion here, and I can tell you now, it works on the ground as well. Next week, when I have a fall guy, I'll show you that Seienshin movement here on the ground. When you're lying on the ground, someone's in your guard or they're on top of you and they're trying to grab you, that Uchi Uke movement will save your life. And that's Uchi Uke into an arm drag. Uchi Uke into an arm drag is one of the most powerful flows that you can do into in your grappling, okay? Because it obeys a lot of really key principles, and the main one being you don't want your elbows to come off your body. So if you can do your grappling with your elbows tight, this movement makes all the difference. Okay, I use Tensho and the Uchi Uke movement in grappling quite a lot, and it's quite good. Now remember, when these masters created the kata, they weren't just talking about punching and kicking, they were talking about all the ranges. And so the transitions into the different ranges are what makes the difference, I think. It's one thing to have a range of techniques for each of those ranges. You have good kicks, good punches. But even in tournaments, if your kicks and your punches aren't connected, it's one of the reasons why some of the students that I've had in the past are so good at what they did, was because, for example, as I've told the story many times, everybody thought Gary O'Neill was a kicker, but in actual fact, he was a puncher who just happened to be the best kicker around. And if you try to counter him by thinking, well, I'll neutralize his kicks by going to punch range, he just hit you, and you'd realize what a mistake it was. So you have to be a master of the transitions from one range to the other. You can't just be a good kicker and a good puncher. You have to be able to transition. And then you have to be able to transition from the punches. You need to be able to, mastery of the ranges is mastery of the transitions from one range to the next. That's very, very important. The other thing too I find about Uchi Uke is the opportunity for wrist locks applies a lot as well. Caius, good to see you again, man. Connection is only good if you have the advantage. If you don't, you need to create distance. Okay, so let's talk about what Caius just said there. In range 4 and 5, space is the enemy of the attacker. Space is the friend of the defender. And this is that's my way of describing what Caius is saying there. Caius said, connection is only good if you have the advantage. If you don't, you need to create distance. 100%. What he says distance, I call space. If you're in a situation where you have optimal sticky tape, what can the other guy do? He has to start to break down that sticky tape bit by bit. It's like when you're opening a box, if you've got a lot of sticky tape, you have to cut it away bit by bit. You can't just explode out of it because that connection is too great. So what Kai's saying there is 100% correct. He says distance, I call it space. If you are sticky taped up with someone's controlling grip, you have to create space, because if you have no space, you have no movement. On the other hand, if you're the attacker and you're trying to optimize sticky tape, space is your enemy. So you have to control them in a way that prevents them from creating space. I'm glad you said that, Kais. It's a really valid principle. It's not just a comment, it's actually a principle. Connection is only good if you have the advantage. Well, let's make it into a principle. You have an attack and a defense. You have space, no space. Space is the enemy of the attacker. Space is the friend of the defender. That's the best way to look at it. Yep, our feet, and it's interesting that you say that because footwork, we've spoken about this, hip movement is the footwork of grappling. So good hip movement will allow you to create the space that Caius is talking about, the distance. But footwork, if your footwork is wrong, more to the point when you're talking about sticky tape and closing in on the fourth range, it's foot positioning that is important. Your footwork is what allows you to transition through the ranges. But once you get in that transition range, your foot position is everything. So good footwork also takes into account correct foot positioning. You can't just, we were doing this on Monday night very briefly, and we're going to do a whole session tonight on the back kick and the positioning of the foot to optimize power on the back kick. So footwork is one thing to make the back kick work, but foot position is everything. Okay, so that's a good point too, Ken. I once had senpai who, when I punched at him, he would immediately grab holding my gi or arm when sparring and punch me in the forehead. Very irritating. That's a really good point. And I can tell you now, one of the best exercises that we've ever done is you just, at some stage, there's two things we'll do in kumite. One of the things we'll do is we're doing normal kumite, and I will go down. And that means they have to close the gap, get control, and take them to the ground. The other thing that we'll do is we'll go hold, and one side will grab the lapel of the other side and lock the arm stiff, straight, and grip. And that, like Ken says, it's very irritating. It's incredibly irritating when someone just grabs your lapel and stiffens their arm, and try and see what you can do. It's worth it. If you go to training tonight, just say, we're going to try an exercise. Partner up. One of you grab the lapel. Now make your grip strong and your arm stiff. Now the other side do something about it. It's very interesting to see what will happen, especially when you're talking about guys with black belts. You're talking about a black belt. A black belt is meant to be an indication of a high level of mastery. Someone grabs your lapel and stiffens their arm, and you just don't know what to do about it. That's very, very disorienting. Okay. We'll wind it up there, I think. We're getting very close to the time. Remember, Uchi Uke out of Seienshin. Uchi Uke, grab, strike, into grab, arm drag, into grab, 2-on-1. You get that gyakute when they hold your hand, the gyakute too, Uchi Uke. That's a whole area that I haven't covered today, is counted against the wrist grabs using Uchi Uke. And that leads into other stuff. And also on the ground, you can move into standing arm locks, into groundwork. There are certain things that you can do. You do Uchi Uke, and you come in and hold, and then you can lock their arm up, and it's very, very powerful and very difficult in the moment for them to release their arm. Of course, anyone can get out of anything given enough time. But in the heat of the moment, when you're talking about a window of perhaps 1 second or 2 seconds, if you get that grip right, boom, they're not getting out of it, and you can take them to the ground and control them. So let's wind it up there. Us, thank you. Footwork is the lifeblood of stand-up fighting. Hip movement is the footwork of groundwork. I wrote that in the book. But anyway, thanks everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm glad to be back. My apologies for being absent for a couple of weeks. Things still aren't finalized, but at least I was able to get to the dojo today and see everybody. So thanks for coming. Us Harry, us Marco. Good on you. Yep, next week I hope I have a fall guy to make it clear more clear on what I'm doing. Sven, Urs, good to see you. Thanks for coming. Daniel, hope you're well. Hope you were able to take some good things back after coming to train. Urs, Mike, thanks always for coming along. Raj, namaste. Thank you. Dhanyabad for coming along. And good on you, Mac. And as I said, everybody give some thought to Hanshi Steve Arneil's passing. He was genuinely one of the greats of the history of Kyokushin. And with his passing, Kyokushin has lost yet another leader. So my condolences to the family, and bless the spirit of Kihon Steve Arneil. Us, thank you, everybody. Look forward to seeing you next week. Us. Thank you.